All right, guys, we'll make a start of what we're doing. Tonight, we're lucky enough to have our senior women's and a long-time VJBL coach, Ben Carroll, come on board and discuss about his strategic philosophy and the building blocks that and how he approaches every team he coaches, and that ranges from it goes from his senior women's side all the way down to under eights and what he's worked with back then. So we're quite excited to have Ben along, and we appreciate your time, Ben. And I'll hand over to you now, mate, and looking forward to your presentation. I've just muted you, Ben, so you got to unmute.
No worries. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me, and also thanks to Drew for sort of laying down the challenge a little bit. But I think it's a good thing, and I think what Drew said that night was pretty much spot on. And I think the more experienced coaches we have on here sharing their stuff, the better. And hopefully, as these times are becoming harsher and harsher, we're able to learn a bit more from each other as we go on. So what I'm going to go through tonight isn't the absolute be-all and end-all of my own coaching, or I'm not going to give you the perfect play or anything like that. So if that's what you were tuned in for, then you may as well tune out, because that ain't going to happen. But what I am going to give you is just a little bit of my sort of Bible for myself that I go back to whenever something feels like it's not working, or things aren't operating. I have 4 things that I go back to. So 2 of them, and I find myself, I didn't even really know that I had at the time. So this is all the way through in every team that I can have. Obviously, with the senior women's team, it can get more complicated, and with an under 10s or an under 12s team, it can definitely be a bit more simplistic. So the last thing I'll say before we get into it is things that are equally important to this, or even more important, is some things like creating your own environment, building team culture, player progression, skill development, those sort of things. So that isn't in any of this. This is just strategic philosophy. So if I click over, which it should have, there we go. So my 4 building blocks are, my 2 offensive ones are valuing the ball and finding our source of score. And then the defensive ones is create the basketball anxiety, and every pass is an opportunity to steal. So some of that we'll look at that and you'll go, yeah, no worries, Ben, like pretty obvious. And some of it, like the basketball anxiety part, anxiety's become a bit of a dirty word over the last 5 to 10 years. That isn't about sending kids home stressing about the game or anything like that. So what I don't want you to have is any anxiety about the word anxiety. So when it comes up and we get to it, that'll make more sense. So if I just go through, I'll go through each one by one, and then, like, I'm not sure what you've done in the past regarding questions and that sort of thing. So if you want to create discussion points at the end of each one, or at the end of the whole thing, that's up to you how you want to do it. I'm not sure how you want to go with that. But
usually any questions, just put to the chat box, and then we ask at the appropriate time, but we can just wait to the end.
Yeah, do that. Whichever way, I don't mind, all right? You just cut me off if you need to. Okay?
Yeah, too easy, mate.
So the first one, valuing the ball. So my little sub point there, learning, understanding, and teaching the value of the ball is so underrated. So I'll give you an example of something that I had when in my junior days. It just rings true to me. Locke and I played under a really aggressive coach in under 14s, and we used to train Sunday mornings at 9 o'clock. And our first warm-up drill of the day would always be where the ball just couldn't hit the floor. So the drill was manufactured where the ball didn't have to be dribbled, it didn't have to be bounced past, so there was no opportunity for it to hit the floor unless there was a mistake made. And what happened was every now and then a wayward rebound would be let go if the ball flew over a head or something like that. But if the ball went flying past, whizzing past someone's head, or someone wasn't ready to catch it, one of those sort of things, as long as we were able to perform the skill that was required, if the ball hit the floor, we were in all sorts of trouble. And I'm not saying that you should be going and doing this to under 8 kids. Anywhere where they can perform the skill, where your opinion is that they can perform the skill to the level it needs to be performed, and the ball goes flying somewhere that it shouldn't, then that really needs to be absolutely cut out. Because when you get into a game, you're just getting to the point where turnovers, throwing the ball away, oh, bad luck, good try, etc., and you're not setting the standard. So we got set the standard in that team that Locke and I played in from the first second that we walked in about valuing the ball. And I think that stayed with me from 12 years of age all the way through. So a couple little numbers that I'll give you. In an under 12 game, whether it be boy or girl, at domestic level, even a bit higher, there's usually around 60 shots in the game. Now, the percentage of that has risen over the years. So I can remember coaching my little brother's team, and they used to shoot at around like 25% at that age. Now, the game's just evolved so much better where it's around 33%, so 1 in 3. And if there's 60 shots going up, then 40 of them are missing, all right? So if there's 40 shots missing, that means the ball's in dispute 40 times between the ball leaving the ring, going out of court, or hitting the hands of the rebounder of either team, whichever team that is. So there's only that, and there's only when the ball is deflected in our game that the ball's really 50-50 up for grabs. Anywhere else in the court, the ball's in someone's possession. So having that real nous of understanding how important it is to be strictly on the board, so rebounding really stringently and being after it is so important, because you don't just have those opportunities coming around that often. And as kids start getting older and start getting better, then that percentage of misses just dries up and dries up and dries up. So that's a really important point of valuing the ball. The other thing that I just wanted to talk about on that first learning, understanding, and teaching, a standard under 12 domestic game has about 40 to 50 turnovers, including violations. So 20 per team is about where it sits. So if you're in the position where you're willing to give up that 20 turnovers and accept that, and I'm not saying that you have to record stats, this will be really obvious to you, and any coach that's coached more so under 10, under 12s at any level will know that this just sticks out when it does. If you're able to dry that up and really drive it home when good stuff's happened that turns that turnover away, when it becomes a positive outcome, then you're going to be so much further in advance. So if I move on to the next one, we're recognizing impact, the impact of a great and or a horrible decision. The example that I'll give, and I'll try and get through this one a bit quicker, but the example that I'll give is the offensive team is coming down the court in a 2-on-1 situation, where Lockie spoke the other week about playing with the advantage. So they're coming down with in a 2-on-1 situation. Let's say the ball is 45 degrees from the ring, on the 45-degree angle, a metre outside the three-point line. The defensive player would be in the key, and you have the other offensive player screaming down the other side of the court to get to the basket. Now, this is the situation of great versus horrible. So many times I see in domestic games, especially, but also in rep games, where the kid will go to make the pass from that meter outside the 3-point line to that guy that's screaming down the other side of the court, and the defensive player that's 2-on-1 just walks through the middle and says, "Thank you very much," and goes to the other end. Now, then you hear the coach or a parent will say, "The idea was right, bad luck." Well, in my opinion, I'm sorry, but that idea was not right. That's 100% incorrect. What I would like to see is there be dribble penetration through the 3-point line. So at least attack past the 3-point line. Get the player, let's say it's under 12s level, maybe even under 10s, get the player in a mid-range position where they're close enough where they can make a shot, and see what that defensive player does. If that defensive player wanders out to the person with the ball, then he makes a pass over for an easy shot. If the defensive player stays at home and looks after the basket, then that player takes their shot. Now, the difference is, in the two, the big difference is, even if the shot misses, the difference is you got one of your shots off, which creates that rebound opportunity, which creates, if your team's stringent enough to get after it, then they're right in it, because it's a 50-50 one-on-one rebounding contest. If they make the shot, they make the shot. Like, that's fantastic. And if they made the pass and got the turnover, then the player would be screaming down the court in a 5-on-3 situation without those two offensive players that have just lost the ball. So, horrible decision versus great decision. Now, what happens next after that, if that turnover happened in domestic basketball, which I see all the time this happens, is the game twos and fro's between that situation, and it just goes up and back, up and back, up and back until someone either makes a great decision and or performs, like, has an excellent skill execution. 2 points are scored, and then the whole thing starts again. So we go 5-on-5, then there's a breakaway becoming 2-on-1, then there's a breakaway becoming 5-on-3, and it just goes and goes and goes until someone scores, and then it starts again. If you can buck the trend of that and get your own score before that happens out of great decisions, valuing the ball, looking after things, then you're going to go a long way to, in my opinion, and in my teams, we're going to go a long way to being successful from that end. So my second point is find our source of score. So the first part of that is, where does our team get majority of its score from? So the perfect example that I could give you out of this is, the first thing that I'll say is, look a little bit deeper. If you're going to record this, and the way that I do it is look a bit deeper than who it is that's scoring, because it's easy to say we get our score because our best two players score all our points, or because our tallest player scores all the points. Sometimes that's just going to be absolute fact and it's going to be true, but most of the time it's coming from somewhere else before it gets to that. So for me, the under 12 number one rep boys that we had this year, we recognised pretty early, and mainly because a lot of our training focus was defensively early on. So what we recognised early was that we were a really good transition team. So instead of going right up in the full court and pressing, we wanted to create layup opportunities. So what we did was we dragged our defense right back behind half court, but we played with press mentality. So we were right up in their face all the time, trying to create bad turnover, bad shot, etc., and making the most of that ball that's in dispute. So we got really hard after the loose stuff, which resulted in layups at the other end. That was our main source of score. If the game got caught up in the 5-on-5, where the other team had 5 defenders back and we had to play against 5-on-5 early on, we really struggled to get any scoring happening. So our main source of score was from that defensive and transition style of game where we could just slingshot from the other end and really rely on our layup percentage to get us some score. The next part is where do I want my team to get its score from? So again, if I use that team as the example, obviously we wanted to score more in the 5-on-5. So if we weren't able to score in the 5-on-5 and we played against a team that looked after the ball pretty good and we couldn't force them into that error, then we really struggled. But what happened eventually was we got to work on that. We were able to educate and get some score from our 5-on-5. And then the ideal way for me is to be able to get 70%, maybe 65% of score from transition and defense. And then another, say, 20-ish% from 5v5. And then with that sort of team, another 10% of score from our sideline, baseline sort of set stuff. But if I was going to wind that even back further to under eights, I would say I would still want to find our source of score, which I could almost guarantee for the coaches that are in here that have coached under eights, most of the time, if you have kids that are willing to go and win that ball in dispute, because it's in dispute way more in under eights, if you have a kid that's just willing to crash in and go and get it, rugby league style, that's probably going to be your source of score most of the time, because he's just going to fly down the other end and he's probably going to be the fastest kid and he's probably going to have the most shots. And that's where most of them come from. So, but I would still do the same thing. So after that, he can only get you 10. So after that, where do I want my team to get score from? And then I'd go to work on that. So if I move through to the defensive side, where we want to create the basketball anxiety. So I'll just explain that manipulating and impacting the game where the opposition offensive player feels the basketball anxiety. So what I mean by that is if you're a defensive player that's guarding the ball, guarding the player with the ball, you want them to take out of their mind the natural thought of who's open, what does my coach want me to do, what side of the court should I be on, it might be what offense am I running, all of those. You want all of that out of their mind, and you want to put into their mind, I've just got to get rid of this. This is just where you're creating this anxiety feeling where they've just got to release the ball, release the pressure, and just get me out of this for 2 seconds where I can just find an open teammate and get them the ball. The more you can create that, the more that mistakes are going to come, because out of their mind is that what does the coach want me to do, et cetera, all the things that I just said. So the next part is how you can do that sort of off the ball as well. So for us and the teams that I coach is I'll give a Big V women's example here. We coached against a team with a really, really tall chick who she couldn't shoot and couldn't score from the outside. And my initial thought was, let's just leave her out there. But what she was a great passer and a really good decision maker. So second time around when we played them, the whole philosophy changed, and I went back to the things that I know that work. And what we did was we wanted to put more pressure on her on the outside, because she had more value probably as a passer than what she did as a scorer. So we went right up and put lots of pressure on her to take her away from that normal feeling of find the open player, be able to make that pass where it was impacting their offense at a high level. We wanted to really strip that away from her, and we were able to do that, and the result really flipped. So all of a sudden we put her in that situation that she hadn't been in. She was feeling the anxiety and was not able to perform the way that that she had previously. The last part, the second part of that is valuing the ball when we don't have it. So if we go back to what we said about valuing the ball on the offensive side, if you're able to create the opportunities when the ball's in dispute more than they are, so what I mean by that is if you're able to get, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to steal the ball all the time, but if you're able to deflect the ball and make it where, you know, when a player might just get a hand to it and then everyone sort of chases after it where it's in dispute, or if you're able to force more bad, low percentage shots of the opposition and the ball's in dispute and you're really good at hunting it after that, then you're going to have way better and you're going to have much more possession than what the other team's going to have. So, and if that's the case, you're going to have more shots. The more shots you have, the more you're going to make, and hopefully, and then that goes a long way to you winning the game as well. So, creating the basketball anxiety, I think, from a defensive point of view, is is probably the most important part. So, on to the last point. Every opposition pass is an opportunity to steal. So you'll see there, if you look down the left-hand side, reaching in at the dribble is just absolute no-no from where I stand, and that's the way that I see it unfolding. So 70% results in a foul. Having said that, out of that 70%, probably 25% of them are actually fouls, but the rest of it, if the hands go in, it just gives the referee a chance to either get in the game somehow, get a breather if they need one, get you back for having a go at them if you did, or one of your players did, or whatever the case may be. If you're not reaching in and your hands are out, then it just doesn't give them the chance to do it. 20% of the time, if the foul isn't called, the dribbler just goes straight past the reacher and goes in for a layup. So the dribbler wins. 10% of the time, you're able to get a steal and run around them and maybe get a layup out of it. So my thing is just take your chances on that and don't reach, and absolutely make it a rule that it's just not acceptable for anyone. A player that Locke and I have both coached has fantastic hand speed and really good timing on his reaching. But when the big games came around, it always seemed to be the case that he was fouling out based on his reaching and always sitting him down. And it's just an absolute nightmare when this happens over and over again. On the fouling part, I have a theory, especially as they get a little bit older, but I have a theory with the fouling that if a player fouls out, normally they get 3 fouls where they've been stiff but had to make the play. So they might have just been late, their body got in the wrong spot, and it just a foul that you had to wear. Then there's usually one where they've been where there's been a really bad mistake, where they've got hot-headed, maybe got in a push and shove, or whatever the case may be. And then there's the reaching foul. And the reaching foul normally happens first. And one of the unlucky ones happens last. And it's when everyone fires up at the referee for calling the unlucky foul, but really the foul that got them fouled out in the first place was the reaching foul. So my big thing there is just get them out. So on the flip side, reaching and trying to steal the pass is a must. Reaching at a pass results in 10% of the time you'll get it and you'll steal it. 20% of the time you'll make a deflection, and 70% of the time nothing will happen and the offensive player just makes his pass. But 0% of the time you'll foul, unless you're absolutely late and you barrel into him. But 0% of the time you'll foul, and 0% of the time he's going to wander past you. So my thing is just get after the pass. This is if we're not able to get stops, if I've got a team that can't get stops and all we're relying on is rebounding, then I need to say to our guys or our girls to just get after the pass harder and all of a sudden things start to change. You get the deflection, obviously more often than you get the steal, which creates the 50-50, which then creates, if you're hunting enough, you can get after the ball. So all in all, there's my my four building blocks of my strategic philosophy. I'm not saying that you have to go and do these. I'm not saying that you have to absolutely agree with every one of them. But what I am saying is that if I'm in trouble and I go back and try and look through, these are the things that I find help me through it. So what I would suggest to any coach at any level is to find your own, whatever that is. You can steal these, but by all means, take whatever you want and totally, like, it's up to you. If you want me to go into it further, like in a one-on-one scenario, Lockie's got my details, you can get whatever you want from me, that's fine. But you should definitely have something that you can go back to rather than going home and scratching your head and saying, I'm just lost. Have something that you can go back on and that you can just say, you can tick across how you went in that area. And I guarantee you that the times when you're feeling really stressed about it and the game sort of gets away from you, which happens to all of us, but if you have 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever it is, of these things that you can go back to and say, did we do this? Yes. Did we do this? Yes. Did we do that? No. Have we been doing that? No. That's what I need to work on. For the next month, we're going to get this right. And all of a sudden, you'll work your way through it, and you'll have so much more method in the way that you approach it. So, yeah, that's me done, Lock.
Hey, thanks, Ben. Had no questions come through, but I've got a couple that are just I've thought of and thought might be beneficial for people to hear.
Yep.
Just firstly, has this philosophy that you have, has that ever changed, or have you ever altered that?
So one of the things that happens often is, short answer is yes, but one of the things that happens often is I'll be going and doing something like this at from someone else from outside of our club, like watching an online clinic or whatever the case may be, going to a coach's clinic or something, and I'll see something that I really think is beneficial, and often I'll go and implement it, and then I'll think about implementing it or how it fits with the team that I'm coaching or whatever the case may be. And then it just seems to always happen where it falls out of what I believe in and what's true to me. And then all of a sudden I'm like, nah, I need to go back to what I know has worked for me. Not necessarily, I don't necessarily mean that in like, if I'm running a certain drill or running an offense or anything like that. I'm not saying I have to go back to that way, because I'm running new stuff every year. But if it doesn't fit in this with me, then I just can't believe in it for myself. Like an example that I'll give you is with the defense. I used to coach for a long time to step off, and like I said about that tall girl, but I used to say to step off, get in really good help position, and just rely on the sort of rope-a-dope style of forcing them to shoot bad shots and waiting for that to happen. But what I found with that I didn't like was that these kids that weren't really good decision makers that I wanted to put under pressure, I wasn't able to do that because we're standing so far off them. So, and then another thing that happened is I started coaching the under 14s team that I took from ULOC, from under 12s, and I was teaching this style defensively where we're standing right off them. And then in their top age under 14s year, when people could start knocking shots down, we were unable to guard them properly, and we were also unable to guard the dribbler because we stood off so far that these kids didn't have the weapons of playing on-ball defense the way that I would have liked. So probably a little bit in depth for domestic stuff, but that's where it ends up going, you know. So that's probably where it has changed, and then I've gone back again. So yeah.
That's good. I like the example of that one with the how you're teaching to step off, and then it's harder to get them to step back up. So I know everything I've found myself personally is it's harder to teach people to play close defense than further away. And if from a young age you teach them to play up nice and close, then they always have that skill with them throughout.
Yeah, Ben. Sorry, I'll go on.
No, go, it's all right.
You know those stats you got there, Ben, the 70% foul and 20% dribble or wins, and is that
that's just my
your
opinion.
Team or from Basketball Victoria or?
No, that's just the way that I see it. That's just it's not really statistically.
Oh right, that's what I'm asking.
But it's the way that I see it. Yeah.
Because I think it'd vary between team, wouldn't it?
100%. And like I said, even player to player, like I said about that player that Locke and I had, he was actually really good at it.
Yeah.
But whenever we're in a big game, it just come back and got us.
Yeah. No, that's all right.
Aaron Goodson was a guy that was so good at it.
Yeah, that's right. He was. You're right. Correct. Yeah. I just was curious whether they were actual stats from VBA or VBL. You know, I mean, whatever. You know, sure what was going on, or something you done as a project for your team.
No,
that's about right. I mean, sounds about right to me. I reckon I'd agree with most of that.
We did some video analysis with that under 14s team on the reaching numbers.
Yep.
And the reaching numbers were around that left-hand side, the 70% foul, 20% dribble wins, 10% steal.
Yep.
It was around that under 14s year that I did, which was about 3 years ago, I think. So it was pretty much that. So
right, mate. Yeah, fine. Thanks, buddy.
Just one other thing, Ben. With your sort of philosophy, how often would you refer to your players with that, or how would you sort of link that to your players and explain it to them?
Good question. So the part that's on the screen now, very, very often. But I think the big thing that I try and talk, especially to younger players. So with the under 12s, the way that I would talk through it is like this, is that we want to have more layups than they do. Whether we make them or we don't, that's neither here nor there. So the way that we create that is by doing A, B, C, and D. So it's sort of working backwards up to the other end. So the way that we create that is by getting in their face defensively. It's by making the player who's dribbling the ball turn his back on the defender so he can't see the rest of the court. So then he's making a bad decision. Then it's by forcing the steal or the deflection or the bad shot and slingshotting as quick as we possibly can to the other end whilst making good decisions to get a layup. So puzzling the pieces of that back into that, talking in the language properly related to the under 12s that I just spoke about is probably the way that I would say it.
Other things, Benny, from my perspective, one's a statement, and then the next one I've just got a bit of a question, a bit of clarifying.
Yep.
Is someone like yourself doesn't get to come up with a philosophy like this without your experience.
Yep.
The reason I say that is that you've been there, you've done that, you've coached thousands and thousands of games, and you've made all of the mistakes along the way. So
100%.
My message in my statement is to the coaches that are on here is, if you think something's going to work, don't be afraid to have a crack at it. And if it doesn't work, throw it out. Now you know that that's not for me. Now you know that's not for me, and that didn't quite work, but at least you had a go at it. You know, you're better off finding out what doesn't work so that you know what does work. That's my statement.
I'll just add to that before.
Yeah, sure.
Can I just add to that before you ask your question? I totally agree, and I think just having a plan and having a philosophy of some sort, doesn't matter how simplistic or how complicated it is more important than anything. And what you just said then, if something doesn't work, or you're hating it, or you're loving it, throw it out or keep it, doesn't matter. But having a plan is the most important thing.
Absolutely agree. Really good. The other thing I want to clarify around reaching at the pass.
Yeah.
So I look at that and I think like I'm in a denial position. So I'm the defender. Yeah. I'm denying the pass away. And when I say reaching for the pass, that means I'm going to intercept that pass. Now, my concern straight away goes to what happens if I don't get that? I'm now creating an advantage for the other team because we're now all of a sudden trying to reach and steal every pass that's out there.
Yeah, so that's a technique. It's a technique to teach, like, which is hard in this situation. But I think it's more about, that would be so much more about your positioning first of all, and where you're situated on the court. But if you're in a position where you can almost make a play on the ball, but still be able to get back and guard your man as he catches the ball or she catches the ball, then you're going to be in a position where the passer themselves gets put in an awkward spot where they're not sure. So that's more the clarity that you want to have for yourself, but you want to take away from them is, does the passer feel that they can make it, that they can make the pass? Are they 50-50 about whether it's going to actually get there? And is the catcher worried about it? Because that's when you get in that that confusion where the catcher might make a backdoor cut and the pass goes just flying out of court because he thought he was coming up forward. And that, if you get yourself in that grey area position where it's not really going to impact you, but it's going to impact them, and then the error gets made and then you can make the play on it, then by all means, I would be teaching the positioning of it where you can make the play, but it's not going to be absolutely detrimental where you're just flying down the court, you're off balance, the pass gets made over the back of your shoulder and the guy's going to the ring. But there's so much more to it than that about how you help and rotate from there by making the play, position, and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I see your point.
No, and that was just clarification for me around what you meant. But
yeah.
I think, and then the way you've just explained that then is really good, because all those things that you talk about, like can the passer make the pass, pushing the catcher off balance, am I 100% sure if he's going backdoor or not? That's building your basketball anxiety, right? So that's
absolutely
putting the defense, putting the offense in that case in an unsure state and building a state of worry and anxiety. I like it. It's good.
That's right. That's right. And what happens sometimes when you're able to do that is the guy who's, let's say the passer per se, the guy who's about to be the passer will look and go to make the pass and pull out of the pass at the last second. And you see that often, especially with kids. And then what happens is he's picked his dribble up. So then by all means, you can just go for it and get up and deny everyone and, get after it. But if you can create them to be in that frame of mind more often than they do to you, then I think it's going to be beneficial.
Great stuff. Thanks, mate.
Oh, good.
Well, I think that's about everything. There's no other questions coming through. If anyone's got any other questions to ask Ben, feel free to jump in now. But otherwise, I think we can wrap things up there. Ben, thanks a lot for your time and your presentation today. It was awesome for me to hear, even though we are so similar. We've had a similar upbringing. It's still good to see how you map things out and the things behind the basket, which we don't always talk about. So it's good for me to have a look at that myself as well, and I hope it was beneficial for all the other coaches as well. So thanks again for your time, and thanks to all the coaches for jumping on and giving up your time on a Wednesday night to learn a little bit more about the game we love. So thanks everyone for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Good job, Benny. Thanks, mate.
Thanks, Benny. Don't disappear.
And next week we'll have another presentation ready to go for you. Next week we'll be delving into one of my favourite things, which is a bit more defence. So we'll cover a little bit more defensive things that you can sort of bring into your sessions at training and your philosophy as well.